Throughout history, two other forces have emerged that are chiefly responsible for war. One of them is called nationalism. Sometimes we call it tribalism. My group is the best. My group needs room. My group needs space. My group is confronted by enemies. They're attacking my group. I have to defend my group. And nationalism is tied up with the most fundamental connection that any one of us has: family. Because a clan is simply an extension of the family, a tribe is simply an extension of the clan, and the nation is simply an extension of the tribe. When you touch family. And the second historical force, which is responsible for a lot of war, although generally at interfaith banquets they say they all believe in love, is religion. There's no doubt about it. Some of the most terrible wars in history have been produced by religion. Look at the wars between Protestants and Catholics. Look at the wars between Muslims and Christians. Look at the wars between Hindus and Muslims, and so forth. One can get up on any stage and always say that religion believes in love, and it does. But it also often sponsors hate. And it's one of the realities that we don't really want to often confront. So one of the fuels of war is religion, because what religion does for you is it places God on your side. Oh. Now, what's just always interesting when you see two football teams both praying to God, I mean, you know, which side is he supposed to give victory to? I don't understand. And therefore, that means your cause is right. Your cause is just. And your enemy, indeed, is the devil. Well, there has been a war going on now for 81 years. You can say Israelis and Palestinians. It's basically a war between Jews and Arabs. It's been going on for 81 years. It started in 1921. Sometimes it was a little cold, and sometimes it was very hot. 81 years is pretty long. We all know about the 100 Years' War between England and France. It's approaching it, by the way. It's only 19 years short. So, there were hot spots, 1921, in the rioting of 1921. In 1929, the terrible fighting and rioting. 1936, when the Arab masses rose up in Palestine against the British government and against the existence of the Jewish Yishuv settlement in Palestine. 1948, the War of Independence, when the Jews defended their territory and indeed created the Jewish state, the state of Israel. And then 1956, when Israel joined the English, the British, and the French in the invasion of Egypt and the taking of the Suez Canal. And then in 1967, the famous Six-Day War, when Israel triumphed, tripling its territory and humiliating the Arab world. And then in 1973, the Yom Kippur War, when the armies of Egypt under Anwar Sadat invaded Israel on Yom Kippur Day, and in fact the Israelis were caught unawares and they suffered losses. Their first significant defeat, although there was a hero in that war. His name was Sharon, who then rallied Israeli forces and crossed the Suez Canal into Egypt proper. And then there was 1982, when the PLO was headquartered in Lebanon, and Menachem Begin, urged on by his defense minister Arik Sharon, invaded Lebanon to drive out the PLO. In fact, they succeeded in driving out the PLO. Arafat, the leader of the Palestinians, fled to Tunis. But the problem, of course, was that a catastrophe occurred in a massacre in two Palestinian camps of Sabra and Shatila, and in fact the Israeli army was compelled to withdraw. And then in 1987, with the emergence of the best tactic that the Arabs had been able to find in fighting the Israelis, not an invasion from the outside, but a rebellion from the inside. It's called the Intifada. That word has now become part of our vocabulary all over the world. And the Intifada, well, it lasted from 1987 until 1993, but then, only a year ago, it was revived. And it's going on with full force. All you have to do is pick up the newspaper, right? There is Arafat besieged in Ramallah. There is Arafat relieved from being besieged in Ramallah. There is Jenin, hotbed, so it is claimed, of Palestinian terrorists and the Israeli army moving in. There is Bethlehem, the presumed birthplace of Jesus, and the church over his presumed birthplace, the Church of the Nativity, shots, firing. 200 people locked up in the church, boom, 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 boom. Suicide bombers, grieving parents, grieving relatives. There's picture after picture after picture in the newspapers, on television. And now the war has been extended between Jews and Arabs. The war has been extended to Europe. In France now, Arab immigrants to France burn down synagogues. It isn't that the war is confined to just Israel and Palestine, that little area. There are two nations fighting each other. Oh, well, the battlefield is what? Everywhere, all over the world. Got the 81 Years' War. Now, there were times when there was hope. So let me mention some hopeful times. There was the time in 1947 when the United Nations partitioned British Palestine, giving part to the Jews and part to the Arabs. Neither the Jewish side nor the Arab side was satisfied with the boundaries. The Arab side rejected the UN division. The Jewish side accepted the UN division with reservations. But there was hope that with the backing of the United Nations, which obviously was supported by the United States and its victorious allies in the Second World War, that this might happen. Then there was 1967, when Israel had its overwhelming victory, tripling its size, and Nasser fell, the leader of the Arab world. It was assumed that now maybe, with this incredible defeat, the Arab world would sue for peace. There would be some chance. Israel would have things to give in exchange for peace. There was 1977 or 1979, when a brave president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, the successor to Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser, flew to Jerusalem, very historic moment, and began the process that would lead with the consent of the Israeli government under the leader at that time of Menachem Begin, which would lead to peace with the largest country in the Arab world. In fact, the security of Israel depends on the peacefulness of that frontier. If the Egyptian government should repudiate peace, if the 60 million people, Arabs in Egypt, right on the border of Israel, this is not Jordan, this is not Syria, this is not Lebanon, would again choose war, it would be devastating. So that was a very hopeful moment. Somebody made peace, right? 1979 at Camp David, Jimmy Carter was still the president of the United States. There was, it was like hope. Oh, maybe. And then in 1993, at the beginning of the Clinton administration, on the lawn of the White House, the Oslo peace process, which had been negotiated in secret and then came out in public and was accepted by both the Israelis and the Palestinians, and people were breathing a sigh of relief. Maybe after 71 years, this war is over. And then the following year in 1994, the same lawn, when King Hussein of Jordan shook hands with Rabin, and now another nation on the borders of Israel, another Arab nation, made peace. Oh, well, that was a very, very hopeful sign. And then when 2 years ago, a man by the name of Ehud Barak became prime minister of Israel and indicated that he would be willing to make sacrifices in order to achieve peace, there was some hope. But most of this hope, certainly for the Israelis and for the Arabs and for America and for the world, has been pretty much dashed by the events that have been going on over the last few months. Now, during the course of this war, there have emerged some very striking personalities. On the Jewish side, you may remember the first prime minister of the state of Israel. Don't tangle with him. David Ben-Gurion, and then his successor Levi Eshkol, and then the man who helped him with the eye patch, the symbol of the 1967 war. Do you remember him? Moshe Dayan, a symbol of the triumph of the Israeli army. And then that iron-willed woman, formerly known as Golda Meyerson, but then she Hebraized her last name, Golda Meir, the lady from Milwaukee. Tough. And then Yitzhak Rabin, his first appearance in the prime ministership of Israel was not a positive one. It ended in disgrace. He and his wife was found shopping in the wrong places in America, and he had to resign as prime minister. That was back in 1977. Generally, when they do his biography now, they sort of leave that chapter out. And then the indomitable Menachem Begin. We will not surrender. We have endured the Holocaust. They will not destroy the Jewish people and the Jewish nation a second time. Never, never, never. Or the man who ultimately negotiated the peace with Egypt. It's true, generally in all countries. The only people that can negotiate a peace are conservatives, because liberals are never trusted as being sufficiently patriotic. And so it's easier for Ronald Reagan to make peace with Gorbachev, do you understand, than for some Democrat to do it, because you can never, accuse Reagan of being unpatriotic. You could never accuse Begin of being unpatriotic. And then there appeared the figure of Bibi Netanyahu. He's still lurking there or standing there. He was the star, certainly, at the great rally that was held by Jews in Washington, D.C. recently. He wants to be the prime minister. His problem is he belongs to the same political party as Arik Sharon. He's a charmer, and he's great for American audiences because he speaks an American English without an accent. So, and then there's the man who needs to see Florine Mark. Okay. Arik Sharon. I mean, for a soldier. I mean, so the great warrior, the brave man who always wanted to be prime minister, actually in 1982 and 83. It was presumed his political career was finished. He was disgraced by the activities, what he presumably allowed in Sabra and Shatila. He's come back, and with a fury. And now he presents himself as the strong leader of the Jewish nation and of the Jewish state. He will brook no humiliation. He will never allow this state to appear weak. And the enemy will not again destroy the Jewish people. Well, we have on the Arab side also a wonderful list of personalities who were part of this war. We have the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was the leader of the 1936 rebellion, tall, blue-eyed, imposing, charismatic. There was Gamal Abdel Nasser. Oh. He was a man who had a dream. The dream was to unite all the 22 states of the Arab world, to create again, do you understand, a unified Arab nation. And if he could only unify the Arab nation, there was no doubt about it, he would be able to defeat his Jewish enemy. So that there it was. And in fact, he was very successful for many, many years. He was charismatic. And he was a secular force in the Muslim world. He hated the imams and he hated the power of organized religion, and in fact he tried to diminish it. But his strategy for unifying the Arab world was indeed to use Israel as the vehicle for doing it, and then he came tumbling down in 1967. One of the great figures is a man that we love to hate, and maybe he loves to hate us, I don't know. His name is Saddam Hussein, who wanted to replace Gamal Abdel Nasser. He too a secularist. He too transformed the economy of Iraq and turned Iraq into a very powerful state, and now he was going to use again the Israeli issue as a way of unifying the Arab world, brought down by none other than the father of our current president, George Bush, but not completely overthrown and still remaining in Iraq, and now described by the son of the president that fought him, the current president, as part of the axis of evil that must be removed. And then there is Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat is the leader of part of the Arab people. They are called the Palestinians. And Yasser Arafat has certainly been very much in the news. People either love him, hate him. And there are people also in the Arab world who aren't crazy about him, but who believe that he may be necessary for the continuation of the struggle. He certainly is a survivor, isn't he? Everybody says he's finished. You know the time. Finish. Sharon says, finished, over, goodbye, Yasser. Get another job. He's not finished. Whatever the reason, the Israeli troops withdrew from around his headquarters in Ramallah, and he is still the leader of the Palestinians and an important figure in the Arab world, because the issue between the Jews and the Arabs is an overwhelming issue in the Arab world. And in order to be a successful Arab leader, you have to be on the right side of the issue. So now let me talk about the issues that have emerged in this 81-year-old war. There are issues that are of importance to the Jews, and there are issues that are of importance to the Arabs, and I want to remind you of those issues because they simply won't go away. They make the peace settlement almost impossible because it's the list of grievances. Once you press somebody for a list of grievances, do you understand? It can sometimes be endless, but these aren't trivial. That is, for both Jews and Arabs, they think both their survival and their honor are attached to these demands. For the Jews, the primary issue from the beginning is the refusal of the Arab world to accept the right of the state of Israel to exist. And in fact, there are many Jews and many Israelis who simply do not believe any Arab leader when he says that he accepts the right of the state of Israel to exist. So it's like one of those non-winning arguments. It goes on with, do you love me? Yes. No. Do you really love me? No answer what? No answer works because the person doesn't believe the answer that you're giving. So the conversation never ends. One of the issues, obviously, are the boundaries. You're talking about an area, British Palestine was 11,000 square miles, under 1/5 the size of the state of Michigan. Divvying it up is not easy. What do we need for security? Oh. Where should the boundaries be drawn? Well, we certainly need the Jordan River. Well, no, wait. But if you take the Jordan River, then you take all of it. One of the issues is Jerusalem, and that is a word which in this struggle is a sacred word. See, if I say Detroit, did I mind leaving Detroit? Well, no, I like Verner Ginger Ale, and I liked Hudson. I know the whole thing. But is it a sacred word? Detroit. Would I die if I didn't get it? Would I cut off my right hand if I didn't see it? Could I adjust to Minneapolis? I don't know. But no, Jerusalem, do you understand, is a sacred word. It's every rock, it's every rill, it's every place. That was the place where the temple was. No. You cannot under any circumstance give it up. Jerusalem is not Wyandotte. Okay, fine. And then there is the propaganda. One of the big issues in the Jewish world is that in the Arab world now, and in the Muslim world in general, the war has created a hate propaganda of such intensity that the centers of anti-Jewishness or anti-Semitism have moved from Europe, where they were prior to the Second and during the Second World War. They have moved to the Muslim world. And you have mullahs and imams and newspapers and all kinds of people calling for the extermination of the Jewish people, and in fact, there are many people in the right wing in Israel who use those statements as a means of motivating people to support their issue. One of the issues is terrorism. Now, terrorism is very old. The reason why we're concerned about terrorism is that at one time, if you were a terrorist, you had a dagger. And you might get one person, right? Were people stabbing people 800 years ago? I mean, yes! Were they stabbing civilians? Yes! Now it's the technology. Somebody walks in, got the bomb attached to them, and they take, what, 35 people? Oh, well now. Now, I do want to tell you about how relative our concern is. Suicide bombers are not something that started with Palestinians. We've had suicide bombing in a place called Sri Lanka now. It goes on for like 25 years beyond. There are two nations living in this little island that used to be called Ceylon. One are called the Sinhalese and they're Buddhist. One are called the Tamils and they're Hindu. They hate each other, and Tamils have been blowing themselves up. You can read it in the newspaper. But nobody cares about Tamils and Sinhalese, do they? I mean, they're a bunch of Asians. We tend to care about issues that affect our own family. And we tend to tune out information that doesn't address our own, where we are. One of the issues is integration, that Israel is saying, well, we're in the middle of the Muslim world. If there's going to be peace, if our economy is going to work, you're going to have to admit our products into the Muslim world. We're going to need trade and commerce. In fact, that was part of the Oslo understanding. One of the issues is Arafat. There are people in Israel who will not negotiate with him, Mr. No-Goodnik, Mr. Sleaze, Mr. Sponsor of terrorism. Never, 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 will never talk to him. And one of the issues is a great fear. What if we sit down and we all sit around and agree on a peace agreement? And there's Mubarak of Egypt, and there's King Hassan of Morocco, and we all sit around. And what if tomorrow Mubarak is overthrown in Egypt by fundamental? I mean, what guarantee do we have that this peace treaty will not be rejected and repudiated by future Arab governments? I mean, what is the security built into the agreement right now? That's always the continuing fear. Well, the Arabs have their issues too. In the Arab world, the big demand is the refusal of many Israelis to recognize the right of a state of Palestine to exist. The answer given by many people on the Israeli right wing is, Palestine already exists. It's called Jordan. Jordan used to be part of Palestine until 1922 when it was severed by the British. Oh. And so, and there are just many Israelis who say, no, this place is too small. We can't have a Palestinian state. It would be too dangerous. So now it's what? The recognition of the right of the state of Palestine to exist. One of the issues for them is the boundaries. So Sharon says, well, we've got to keep certainly what we had in 1967, and we have to keep all the Jewish settlements, of which there are almost 200 in the West Bank, and we have to connect all those settlements to the old part and the whole thing. So the Palestinians are left with donut holes. That's what they have now. Each of their cities is surrounded by Israeli troops, and each one is a donut hole, which the troops can enter whenever they want to. There's Jenin. You go in, you pull out. There is Ramallah, you go in, you pull out. And you would have approximately somewhere around 1,300 square miles. Insufficient to guarantee a respectable Wyoming ranch. So the issue is, what are we getting? One of the issues, obviously, is Jerusalem, because now that city is what also in the air, Al-Quds, or the holy city, the place, the Dome of the Rock, the place where Muhammad ascended to heaven, the whole thing. It's not Des Moines. The nice thing about America is that we're not old enough to have sacred cities. So that, do you understand? So we may, there may be some, Philadelphia, that may be the case. One of the issues, obviously, is the refugees. There are most likely 7 million Palestinian Arabs. 3.5 million live inside either Israel or the West Bank and Gaza. 3.5 million do not. We want the refugees to have the right to return. That's what peace means. Then there's the issue of water. There's no water. This is a desert. Who controls the water? Well, now the Israelis sort of control the water. Will the Palestinian state get any water? And one of the major issues for the Arabs indeed are the settlements, the 200 settlements made by the Israelis in the West Bank and in Gaza, most of them by the Orthodox. And they're still opening new ones, I don't know, right now. So, if you only have 3,500 square miles available to you at the most, and there are 200 Jewish settlements in the middle of it, what do you have? What is your possession? And then there's the whole issue of the military. Peace can only be possible if Israel has its army, but the Palestinians may have nothing other than a police force, because you couldn't allow a Palestinian Arab army to be present in the West Bank and Gaza. And one of the issues for the Arab world is what they regard as the treatment of Arabs in Israel, which they say is not equal to that of the Jews. All right, so. And after all, that's sort of understandable. That is, the political sympathy of most of the Arabs in Israel is not with Israel, but with the Palestinians. I mean, it's also problematic. Now, I do want to mention that the Jewish state has had some incredible successes and also faces, during this whole war, some overwhelming problems. Its successes, it established a state against overwhelming odds. It created a culture built around a Jewish language called Hebrew. It developed an economy which today, although it's troubled, is a first world economy developing a profile of high tech. It created an army of overwhelming force such that it was able to hold off the Arab world and the Muslim world, and now has available to it, to its army, a technology which is terrifying to its enemies, including, and everybody knows that Israel has it, it has nuclear weapons. And in fact, its success is that it was able to create a state where there were only 600,000 Jews in 1948. There are now 5,250,000 Jews that reside in this state. And the most important thing, success of the state of Israel, is that Israel acquired an ally its ally, is the most powerful nation in the world. That nation is none other than the United States of America. And in fact, in times of trouble, Israel turns to the support of the U.S. government and the U.S. people in order to guarantee its safety and its security. Now, it has problems. Israel is a democracy. It has political parties. It has internal disputes. One of the disputes is between the left and the right. The left, well, the left is willing to compromise on peace. They're willing to give up the settlements. They're willing maybe to withdraw to the boundaries of 1967 with adjustments. Their point of view was represented by Prime Minister Ehud Barak. And then there is the right. The right is represented by the Likud party, of which Arik Sharon is the head. The right is also supported by most of the Orthodox parties, in particular the National Religious Party, which has sponsored most of the settlements in the West Bank. And their attitude is, if we had our druthers, there would be no Palestinian state. And if we're willing to make a compromise, we're willing to accept an autonomous Palestine within Israel, pretty much like an Indian reservation inside of Arizona. Surrounded by Israeli troops, policed by the Israelis to make sure that the Palestinian Arabs indeed will behave. And in fact, that has been the policy of the present government. The government today is a coalition between the left and the right, but is controlled by the right, the leader of which is Arik Sharon. And that dispute is what? It goes on in Israel all the time. One of its problems is the dispute between the secular and the religious. By the religious are meant the Orthodox Jews. For the ultra-Orthodox, certainly, and for many of the Orthodox, giving up any part of the West Bank and even Gaza, if you will, is wrong because the land was given to Israel by God and therefore must be defended, and there must be no concern about a continuing war, because if God is on your side, you will ultimately win and prevail. One, certainly, of the issues, which is beginning to vanish a bit, but it's there, is the hostility within Israel between those Jews who came from Europe and those Jews who came from the Arab countries. We call one group the Ashkenazi Jews and the other group the Sephardi Jews, and in fact, the tensions between the two, to some degree, still linger. One of the problems, and it's quite evident, is that while Israel enjoys the support of the United States of America, it has in recent months lost the support of one of its former allies, the nations of Europe. In fact, the country that has been most generous with Israel since the end of the Second World War, interestingly enough, has been Germany. And in fact, Holland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, whatever. Israel has enjoyed the support of most European countries. Today, as a result of the Intifada and the propaganda, certainly on television, the public opinion in Europe has turned against the state of Israel and has turned against Israel not only in Europe, but obviously in the Third World. The one place where pro-Israeli statements are to be found is in America, is in North America. And the other problem, obviously, is that the war intensifies in the Muslim and the Arab world the growth of anti-Semitism, which is expressed not only in the small space of Israel and Palestine, but is also expressed in countries wherever Jews and Muslims or Jews and Arabs encounter each other. Well, the Arabs, well, they've had their successes during this war. During the course of this war, the Arabs achieved their independence. When the war began in 1921, almost every Arab country was under the control of a European power. The Arab countries are now free and independent. The Arab powers have achieved a certain level of unity. Although there are 22 states, there is a unifying issue that unifies all the Arab powers, and that is their support of the Palestinian cause, sometimes weakly, sometimes strongly, but whatever it be. One of the successes is that the word Palestinian emerged in 1967 and 1968 and is now recognized all over the world. Yes, they are part of the Arab people, but like Libyan Arabs, Egyptian Arabs, Moroccan Arabs, they have a right to their own territory, and that awareness in the world has also been a success. One of the great successes was that in Arab territory there was found a substance which was rendered very important by the growth of Detroit. The automobile now provided a great need for petroleum. And in the Arab world is this petroleum. One of the great successes is that the Arabs, who constitute somewhere around 200 million people, have been able to enroll in support of them 1,300,000,000 other people who belong to the Muslim world. Now, they have problems. There are problems, obviously. They're divided into 22 states, and each state is jealous of its own independence, and merging them is not easy. Since they never went through the Industrial Revolution, they are backward. Their economies are backward. They also have divisions, serious divisions. They have a division between secularists and fundamentalists, or moderates and fundamentalists, extremists and moderates, and that's an internal argument which also affects Arab decisions very much as the similar argument affects Jewish decisions. And one of their major problems is 9/11. 9/11 made the United States of America and the American government very much aware of terrorism coming out of the Muslim world. In fact, 9/11 created an American government determined to fight all terrorism. And in fact, from some of the statements, certainly from George Bush, he acknowledges that Palestinian terrorism is no different from Osama bin Laden terrorism. And so now the United States of America has turned against the leadership of the Palestinian world and some of the Arab world, which is presumed to be in favor of terrorism as a weapon in the war against the Jews. So right now, it is May 2nd, 2002. What are the realities with regard to the Jewish world, especially in Israel? The first is that there is incredible fear. After the terrorism and the suicide bombings Most Israelis think twice before they go out of the house or out of the apartment to go to the market to buy anything, and certainly to let their children go freely. In fact, the nation has become pretty much a nation of prisoners. It happened in a small way in this country after 9/11. People were afraid to go to the airport. Do you remember that? They wouldn't get on an airplane. They wouldn't go to certain public places. I mean, they were afraid. But in Israel, there is no space that is presumed to be safe. There's all this fear. And by the way, fear is depressing. There's all this anger at the loss of life, at the people blown up, at the innocent civilians who become targets of the war, and also at the failure of most of the world, that's how the Israelis think, to recognize their suffering. There is the collapse of the left. In Israel, ever since Arafat repudiated Ehud Barak's offer, and Barak fell. And certainly with the continuing intifada, there are very few people around who are in favor of reviving the old peace agreement. In fact, the right is increasing its power. Over 70% of the Israelis now say they approve of the policies of Sharon. Many people who vowed they would never say a nice thing about him now say, well, look what he's done. He's gone in and cleared out the what? The nests of terrorists. Along with the support of the right, Sharon now seems to have a plan. The plan is to get rid of the national unity government. The national unity government includes the left. The left is led by Shimon Peres, who is the foreign minister, who may be on his way out. The sign of it is that Sharon has just invited into his government one of the most militant political parties in Israel, a party that says we'll never give up the settlements, never give up the West Bank. They're the National Religious Party. They're now in the government, and maybe he will reconstruct his majority in the parliament, excluding labor and not having to endure what he considers to be the soft answers of Shimon Peres, who always says, no, maybe we can negotiate, maybe we can get rid of him. Reality. The economy is in terrible shape. Tourism, which is one of the major industries in Israel, is finished. The only people who come over as tourists, there are two groups. One are Orthodox Jews, and the second are people from the Christian religious right in America. Because as you may know, the Christian fundamentalists in this country support the right-wing policies of Sharon. Making strange allies. Aren't those strange allies? I mean, after all, certainly through the 1980s and whatever, most of the Jewish community was seen fighting the religious right, who want to merge religion and government. So now the issue is, who are the friends? Who are the enemies? Oh. In addition, the high-tech business, the export business of anything has been radically affected. There is high unemployment now in Israel. And the economy is certainly being tested. One of the realities is the end to immigration. There is a large Jewish community of 200,000 Jews who most likely would leave a country called Argentina. I mean, there's nothing more unlucky today than living in Argentina. You cannot imagine how terrible it is. The middle class has been destroyed. Can't even get your money out of the banks. There's no cash for people to use. And in fact, a logical place for many of the Argentinian Jews to go is Israel. For some odd reason, they do not wish to go. They don't wish to go because they're going to walk into the middle of a war. One of the realities is that the United States of America remains a faithful and supportive ally of the state of Israel. And in fact, in recent statements, George Bush has supported Sharon and declared that Arafat is the guilty partner, and in fact, Arafat and the Palestinians have to clear up their act. In the last week or so, he's begun to weaken that statement because of pressure brought by Arab powers. But I mean, the great strength for Israel right now is not only the strength and power of its own army, it's also the support of the United States of America. And certainly in the Bush regime, there are many, many people, including Donald Rumsfeld and his deputy Wolfowitz and so forth, who are very, very supportive. Well, what are the realities with regard to the Arab world? There's a lot of anger, meaning the word that goes out obviously is that you can see it on TV. Israeli tanks enter Jenin. The Palestinians have stones and guns. I mean, whatever it be, they have the image of the underdog. So now in the Arab world there is increasing anger and frustration. The frustration is created by the reluctance of the Arab powers to intervene. I mean, the question in the Arab streets is, so why aren't these Arab governments doing something to support the what? The Palestinians, the Syrians, the Egyptians. Where are they? Well, the reason they don't interfere is, one, they understand the weaponry power of Israel, but most important of all, they understand that Israel enjoys the support and the patronage of the United States of America, and today America is the hegemonic power in the world. One, certainly, of the realities is that as a result of the war, radicals are growing in number all over the Arab world. You can see that by the street demonstrations. In Egypt, wherever, in Syria, it doesn't make any difference. The radicals are growing and the fundamentalists are growing, not because so much of religious conviction, but because it is believed that the only force in the Arab world willing to rescue the Arab honor are the fundamentalists, and that happens to be true of the Palestinians. The authority of Arafat's forces decreases and the force of Hamas increases. One of the realities is that now the European powers, European public opinion has turned from being pro-Israel to being pro-Palestinian. And one of the realities certainly is that Arafat is here to stay for a while. Even the people who don't like him in the Arab world would never get rid of him. Sharon has turned him into a hero. By besieging him, do you understand, in his headquarters, he has been turned into the symbol of Palestinian resistance. And so now, with his liberation, they all come to greet him and honor him. Nobody has figured out who would be his substitute and alternative. It's like your family. You may not like your children that much, but if somebody attacks them, you would. So now let's turn to the realities concerning the United States of America. This war, this 81-year-old war, which is now hot again, is a danger to the United States of America. Already there is talk in the Arab world of an oil embargo. Now the response that you often hear is, oh, the Arabs need the money, there's not going to be an oil embargo, and plus we have alternative places to get oil. Well, that will take a few years. That is, if most of the Arab and Muslim world turned off the spigots, whatever they are, didn't ship it, then there would be an economic crisis, and we can witness it in 1973. An oil embargo would harm the global economy, which in the last couple years, because of the recession, has been partially in crisis. And the war endangers what George Bush created after September the 11th. He created this magnificent coalition, which includes Europe and Russia and China and Muslim powers, to fight world terrorism. Oh. Well, now that coalition seems to be breaking up. The Europeans aren't taking direction from Bush. The only country in Europe that seems to be supportive of the Bush policy is Great Britain. And nor are the Russians, nor are the Chinese. They don't see how their vested interest lies in the support of the government of Sharon. Well, if indeed the agenda of the United States of America is to continue this war against fundamentalist terrorism in the Muslim world, what the United States of America needs in order to do it are Muslim allies. Simultaneous with the talk of those Palestinians need to behave comes the plan to attack Iraq. And the plan involves the following reasoning. The Arabs talk a lot, but if America, without Arab bases, attacks Iraq and invades Iraq and overthrows Hussein, they won't interfere and they will be secretly grateful. Now, how you can plan an attack on Iraq without the support of Arab and Muslim powers? I mean, remember the Gulf War? The Gulf War involved the support. We had bases in Saudi Arabia. We had the support even of Syria, which had been an historic enemy. So is this grandstanding? Does it have any reality?
Only you can prevent forest fire.
And it's true. We